There have been numerous calls to reform the House of Lords, and some of these are about looking at other nations that have got a bicameral system and observing that, for example, as somebody says in a letter in the Daily Telegraph today, ours is the only country other than China which has got a larger upper house than lower house. That shouldn't really matter hugely. Most of the upper houses are dealing with federal issues, regional issues, social, cultural integration. Now, Gordon Brown's proposals are precisely targeted at that. But the idea of an election of an upper chamber after an election of the Commons is a step towards republicanism, and I think, and is a step towards a constant cycle of elections. And that may be no bad thing, but equally a functioning House of Lords where people are not looking at the next election in order to survive and in order to speak. They've not got their eye on the ballot box. They've got their eye on the issues being debated. This gives us a very interesting angle, and certainly the quality of the debates in the upper chamber are significantly superior to the slogan peddling that dominates the House of Commons at the moment. That said, the upper chamber is clearly not only top-heavy, but emasculated as well, as is demonstrated by the extraordinary opposition of the upper chamber to the illegal immigration bill, and finally its capitulation quite suddenly, despite its reservations, simply because it is not the elected chamber. Now, being a second elected chamber, would that change that? I don't think it would change it a great deal. There would always be the sense that one chamber was more important than the other. And being a second elected chamber, I think, would diminish the quality of the discussions. But a discussion that isn't considered, a discussion which is dismissed, because, quote, the people have spoken, because, quote, the people have elected us in the Commons, and because this is part of our manifesto, even if it isn't, which it wasn't. What's the point of a debate if it goes nowhere? What's the point of a debate if it does nothing? It's just hot air. And maybe we have too much hot air in the Westminster bubble anyway. So a second chamber which has no power is not unlike the second chamber in modern Russia. Actually, not unlike the lower chamber in modern Russia. You know, lip service to what? Noise making. It's what we need is a second chamber which positively complements rather than compensates for the inadequacy of the first chamber. The first chamber needs to change the way it does business, because at the moment it's wasting our time. And Prime Minister's questions have demonstrated for a little while the futility of the House of Commons as a chamber. We need a second chamber, I think, possibly to pool the resources of the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, and the Northern Ireland Assembly, and also to speak up clearly for an English Assembly. And we need something that has got sound political authority, and we shouldn't ignore the fact that the throne is in that second chamber. I think the hereditary principle, destroying the hereditary principle, although I can see very good reason for it, has destroyed the logic of the second chamber, and it's become a largely appointed second chamber. That, I think, is worse than a hereditary chamber. And the predominance of Conservative supporters, well, that's not true anymore. What we've got is a predominance of Liberal supporters. And the question is, should the second chamber mirror the electoral makeup of the first chamber? My own hunch is that probably shouldn't be the case. But maybe there could be some manipulation with party whips to ensure that there's greater parity, if not absolute conformity to the makeup of the primary chamber. But those are the issues, and then the process of reform itself, which is necessary. Reform is undoubted, but how it's reformed is a much bigger question. The process of reform is going to take time, and getting rid of tradition or compromising on tradition. So what we've got at the moment is a compromise. What is being proposed is to get rid of tradition. And I think that might be worse than the compromise. What we need to do is rethink tradition, which is what was so brilliantly done by people during the period immediately following the death of Queen Victoria. Rethinking and recreating tradition. And so much so that we think it's all been there forever. It hasn't. And how we do that's a much bigger question. And nobody has come forward with a decent answer.